Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. But before we take a look at today's newspaper, we have a small announcement. BYJU'S Exam Prep has launched Target Mains 2022. It is a dedicated course for your upcoming mains exam, and through this, we shall be covering more than 130 topics, both static and current affairs, along with relevant questions and model answers in order to help improve your answer writing skills. This course is exclusively available on the BYJU'S Exam Prep app. And starting yesterday, every evening we shall go live at 7:30 p.m. And for the next 90 days, we shall help you revise and practice all the important topics so that you are adequately prepared for Mains 2022. So all you have to do is to download the BYJU'S Exam Prep app, and the link for the same has been provided in the description and the pinned comment below. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This column examines the rising global food prices and how it is creating an unprecedented crisis for the global economy and for food security. See, over the last 2 years, commodity prices have been rising, especially that of food prices, because production, supply, and distribution of essential commodities have been hit ever since the breakout of the COVID-19 pandemic. This shock event disturbed the global supply chains and has led to shortages of essential commodities, including food items. The shortages obviously results in an inflationary situation, and as a result, prices of essential food items have shot up, thereby threatening the global economy and global food security. Upon this, the ongoing war in Ukraine led to a major shock in the global food markets and has led to serious food shortages and inflation. According to the World Bank's Food Commodity Price Index, food prices have reached a record high and they're up by 15% over just the last 2 months, and they've increased more than 80% compared to the prices 2 years ago. The Russia-Ukraine war in particular has further aggravated the crisis that was triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, because Russia and Ukraine are major producers and exporters of several key food commodities, including wheat, edible oils, etc. This combined crisis has led to a broad-based increase in commodity prices, and the ongoing crisis in global supply chains has further triggered inflationary situation. Economists have anticipated that food prices are expected to increase further by at least around 20% this year, because there are many more added risks that are threatening global food production, supply, and distribution. Due to general rise in inflation around the world, input cost in agriculture has gone up due to increase in prices of fertilizers, seeds, and other essential inputs. The global supply chain disruptions have not eased as well, and this has further hit distribution of food items and their prices. As a result of these challenging economic conditions, several countries have adopted inward-looking economic policies, and they have placed restrictions on exports of essential food items. For example, India has banned the export of wheat. Indonesia, on the other hand, banned the export of palm oil. So these policy restrictions of few countries on exports are going to further contribute to the crisis and result in broad-based increase in food prices, which is expected to last at least until the end of 2023. So this crisis situation in the global food market is threatening the global economy and as well as global food security. So in this context, the writer of the column examines the crisis in detail and talks about possible steps through which the crisis could be tackled. The writer of the column points out that global food prices are subjected to volatility, usually from season to season or from year to year, because of expected seasonal changes in demand and supply. Such periodic volatility is expected, and governments tend to manage them by making suitable changes to their trade policies and domestic policies. But however, when there is a sudden and steep and severe price shock, such as the one we are witnessing over the last 2 years, then it can easily lead to a major crisis at the national level and as well as at the global level. Because such sudden and unexpected severe price rise will directly affect hunger and poverty levels and will also force governments to spend more on food safety nets, that is essentially on food security programs, thereby depleting government of its resources and could eventually result in widespread hunger that could also translate into social unrest. So it is in this context that we need to understand the factors responsible for such sudden and severe price rise and how it impacts countries around the world, especially the countries which are net importing nations. Because as the cost of essential food imports go up, it will deplete and strain the country's forex reserves, thereby pushing those countries into a deeper economic crisis. According to data provided by international organizations such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Bank, and the IMF and the UN, since the Green Revolution of 1960s, the world has been hit by three major food crisis situations. The first such major shock in food prices was seen in 1973-76, when the food prices more than doubled as a result of crisis in the global markets, especially in the oil markets. The second such major disruption in food prices was seen in 2008 following the global financial crisis. And these high food prices lasted until 2011 before it started declining from 2014. And now we are witnessing the third major shock to global food prices since 2020, which happens to be a direct result of the pandemic, the disruption in global supply chains, and now the Russia-Ukraine war. One common factor about all the three crisis situations is that, in all three cases, the surge in food prices were triggered by external factors, that is, factors which were external to agriculture. For example, the crisis between 2008 and 2011 was triggered by the global financial crisis, not by problems within the agri sector. The same is the case with the current food crisis and as well as the one witnessed in 1970s. So these experiences should offer lessons to governments on how to handle and better manage these external factors in order to minimize the impact on the agriculture sector. The current ongoing crisis in particular offers lessons for India because the rise in global food prices and inflation has direct implications for India. As Indian markets are deeply connected with the global markets, external shocks will have a domestic impact, and India has been trying to insulate itself from these external factors through its trade policy by trying to restrict export and import of agri products. This is what explains India's recent decision to ban the export of wheat, and this is where India has to carry out a tough balancing act. Because on one hand, the government is obligated to first ensure domestic food security and to maintain price levels within the domestic markets. But on the other hand, the government needs to ensure that export-import restrictions shouldn't take away the opportunities available for farmers and traders who can actually capitalize on the adverse conditions in the global markets by trying to capture some of the global market share. This balancing act is particularly important in the case of wheat and wheat exports, because while wheat is a staple food item in the domestic market, it also has tremendous export potential, especially considering that exports from Russia and Ukraine have declined following the war. So this gives Indian farmers and traders an opportunity to capture a part of the global market share, but the government has to be mindful of its domestic prices as well. So this balancing act of India is reflected in its policy of strategic liberalization, and this policy has served India quite well. Under this policy, the government takes a strategic decision based on domestic conditions and global conditions to regulate the export of essential food items into the global market. Through this policy of strategic liberalization, the government is able to allow for free exports with higher limits when domestic demand has already been met. But at the same time, the government has the flexibility to curb and restrict exports in order to contain prices in the domestic market first. Along with this, the policy of maintaining a buffer stock of essential food items has served India well to not just fulfill its food security commitments under the public distribution system, but also under various other food security related schemes and programs. The buffer stock also helps in insulating the prices in order to shield the Indian domestic market from external shocks in the global markets. In this context, it is very important to note that agriculture price indices have shot up significantly over the last 2 years, according to the World Bank. And the impact of the pandemic and the Russia Ukraine war has been clearly felt in the production of several essential food items, including wheat, maize, rice, soybean, etc. In all these essential food commodities, production and supply around the world has declined, thus raising fears of inflation and food insecurity around the world. So, to tackle this crisis, India has been trying to employ the right mix of policy measures so that India can first protect its domestic market and meet the domestic demand while trying to exploit any global opportunities available in the export market. But even though India sits in a comfortable position with regard to cereal crops such as wheat, rice, etc., India still has to catch up with regard to production of pulses and edible oils. This is where India is heavily dependent on imports from other countries. And India will have to employ better technological methods, just like it did during the Green Revolution of 1960s and 1970s, in order to boost the domestic production of pulses and edible oils. With the right mix of agriculture technology and inputs, including quality seeds, fertilizers, and better water management techniques, India should try to become a little self-sufficient with regard to other food items as well, in order to reduce its import dependency. Then, to deal with the crisis at the global level, there has to be global cooperation between governments and as well as between international institutions and organizations. At the global level as well, there has to be focus on increasing production and in easing the bottlenecks in the supply and distribution channels, while simultaneously focusing on improving agricultural productivity. Now let's take a look at an editorial from page number 6, which examines the increasing rivalry between US and China and how it increasingly poses tough choices for third countries like India. This analysis comes up in the context of recent observations made by senior US officials. Recently, a senior US military commander who was on a visit to India expressed concern about China's increasing military activities and military buildup along the line of actual control, thereby sending a message that US sees the India-China border dispute along the LAC as not just a bilateral dispute between India and China, but as part of a broader aggressive behavior by China across the region in triggering territorial tensions and disputes with other countries. Following these observations made by the senior US military commander, the US Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, also made a similar observation about China's military buildup along the line of actual control and equated it with China's increasing military aggression in the South China Sea and East China Sea. The US Secretary of Defense made these statements while he was taking part at the Shangri-La dialogue, and he sought to equate China's military buildup against India along the LAC with China's military aggression in the South China Sea and East China Sea. This shows that the US is increasingly stepping up its involvement in all the disputes and conflicts of the Indo-Pacific in order to directly challenge and counter China's aggression in the region. But this face-off between US and China creates very tough choices for other countries like India, because while India would appreciate the American support against China, it may not be entirely comfortable in being part of an American-led alliance that is explicitly looking to target and counter China in the Indo-Pacific. See, the US has made it clear that the Indo-Pacific region is going to be the priority theater of operation for the US, and that explains the American involvement in the conflicts and disputes of the Indo-Pacific, and it also explains the American priority being given to groups and organizations like the Quad and the AUKUS. While the AUKUS between Australia, UK and US is explicitly a military alliance, the members of Quad like India have made it clear that the Quad is not a military grouping, in order to ensure that India is not seen as part of any military club that is designed to target China. Because India would like to retain its independent foreign policy, and it would not like to get caught up in the ongoing global rivalry between US and China. While India does want the American support to strengthen its defense capabilities to stand up against Chinese aggression, it wouldn't want to be drawn into a much larger conflict involving the US and China. China, on the other hand, already sees groupings like Quad as the Asian version of the NATO, and this assessment of China could lead it to step up pressure against India as it sees India as a military ally of the US. So these geopolitical policies of US and China that emerge from their rivalry creates tough options and difficult choices for other countries like India. And it also explains why India doesn't take a public position on issues such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc. On these internal issues of China, the US would expect its close allies and friends like India to take a stand. But India largely stays away from taking such positions in order to not trigger China unnecessarily. In fact, India's interests are best served when it continues receiving diplomatic support and support in the form of defense equipment to strengthen its capabilities against China. But India is never comfortable in being part of alliances designed to target any other country. So the editorial is exploring those difficult choices being faced by countries like India as a result of increasing rivalry between US and China. Now, from the prelims point of view, you should also know what is the Shangri-La Dialogue. The Shangri-La Dialogue can be particularly important for your prelims because it is a Track 1 intergovernmental security conference that is held every year in Singapore. A Track 1 diplomatic event involves the participation of government officials, diplomats, intelligence agents, military officers, and as well as leaders and representatives of governments. This is considered to be the most important security-related event, which is hosted by an independent Singapore-based think tank, the International Institute for Strategic Studies. This annual forum was started in 2002 and is held every year at the famous Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore, and hence the dialogue is also named after it. This is considered as the most important diplomatic and military conference that is held, and it witnesses participation from several defense and foreign ministers, head of ministries, military chiefs and government officials of important countries in the Asia Pacific. Along with such official representation from governments, several experts, journalists, and business delegates also participate in a non-official capacity, and India also quite often sends its representatives to the Shangri-La Dialogue. During the recent edition of the Shangri-La Dialogue, India interestingly did not send any official representation, but however, it does take part in the Shangri-La Dialogue directly or indirectly, as this summit brings together all the key policy makers in the defense and security community of the Asia Pacific. Now let's take up a column from page number 7, in which the writers are arguing in favor of the right to repair of consumers. See, the demand for right to repair has become a global movement under which the consumers are demanding their right to repair their devices and gadgets without having to depend on the repairs and service provided by the manufacturer. The logic behind the right to repair movement is that the individual who purchases a product, they must own it completely from end to end, that is from purchase to end of life. It essentially means that the consumer, once they buy the product, they should not only have the right to use the product as they want, but they should also have the right to repair it, modify it as they want. Generally, when it comes to repair, servicing, and modification, the manufacturers, they hold a complete monopoly over their products by mandating that you have to get your products repaired only by the manufacturer. And eventually they end up charging exorbitant prices for repairs and services, thus reaping massive profits even after the product has been sold. Manufacturers, generally tech giants, they argue against the right to repair movement because they believe that allowing for third-party repair and modification will lead to security and privacy concerns, especially with regard to data privacy and data security. However, many governments have already taken initiatives and implemented policies that promote right to repair, as it not only guarantees the right of consumer over the product, but also helps in reducing e-waste, as consumers need not discard their faulty products and instead they can get them repaired and serviced through third-party vendors. But the monopoly on repairs and services exercised by the manufacturers goes against competition laws and also infringes on the right to choose of the consumer, which is recognized under the Consumer Protection Act in India. In fact, even the legal and judicial framework in India with regard to consumer disputes has already partially recognized the right to repair of the consumer. And in the Shamsher Kataria versus Honda Seal Cars case of 2017, the Competition Commission of India had ruled that restricting the access of independent automobile repair units to spare parts by way of an end user license agreement was against the spirit of competition. Because manufacturers and companies, they generally tend to bind their consumers through end user license agreement and force users to opt for repair and servicing only through their franchisees and channels, which ends up becoming very expensive for the consumer. This not only restricts the choice of the consumer against the spirit of the Consumer Protection Act, but also reduces competition as third party vendors cannot compete against the manufacturers due to the end user license agreement. India's Competition Commission had ruled that the practice of retaining monopoly over repairing and servicing is detrimental to consumer welfare, and this in a way recognizes the right to repair of the consumer. In fact, in countries like US, Australia, and the others, laws and policies have already been introduced to recognize right to repair of the consumer, which helps in upholding consumer rights and as well as the spirit of competition. The writers of the column bring out their argument in favor of right to repair because recently the US state of New York has passed the Fair Repair Act, which mandates the manufacturers to supply repair information, the needed manuals, tools, and even parts to independent repair shops and third party vendors, and not just to their exclusive stores and partners. So, with this, the consumers need not be dependent on the manufacturer for repair and servicing, and hence the writers support and appreciate the policy that recognizes right to repair of the consumer. But however, they also highlight the drawbacks of such a policy as it fails to recognize the rights of manufacturers. According to the writers, right to repair, which does not balance the rights of manufacturers, will lead to blatant violation of intellectual property laws, as opening up repair and servicing to third party vendors would definitely compromise the intellectual property that is owned by the manufacturers. It could also result in threats to security and privacy of consumer data, as third party vendors may not be obligated to protect the data privacy and data security of the consumers. So, in this context, the writers argue that the scope of right to repair has to be specifically defined, which should balance the rights of manufacturers as well. Manufacturers also have another legitimate concern that if repairs and servicing is carried out by third party vendors, then this might compromise the quality of the product as well, and the manufacturer may not be able to guarantee it. So, to resolve this conflict, the writers suggest that first the manufacturers should provide a guarantee about the quality and durability of their products in a transparent and verifiable manner. So, this way, the consumers are aware of the quality and the durability of the product, and they can hold the manufacturer accountable if these quality standards are not met. This would parallelly encourage the manufacturers to share all the required repair and servicing information with third party vendors as well, so that even they can adhere to the same quality standards. So, transparent and verifiable sharing of quality standards, along with repair and servicing manuals, without compromising IP rights of the manufacturer, would be possible. And this would at the end benefit the consumers as the quality and durability is guaranteed, while repairs and servicing can become cheaper and affordable to the consumer. According to the writers, in the case of India, Consumer Protection Act of 2019 implicitly recognizes right to repair under Section 2, Clause 9. But in India, this right is largely disregarded by the manufacturers, and hence they call for an explicit inclusion of right to repair into a specific law that could balance the interests of consumers and manufacturers. They also argue that India could draw lessons from France and as well as from the European Union in this regard, because France already requires manufacturers to display a repairability index on their products, which consists of 5 parameters. This index helps the consumer understand whether the product is repairable by a third party vendor, and accordingly leads the consumer to make the right decision with regard to repairing and servicing. Then the European Union has brought out its guidelines on eco design for energy related products and energy information regulations of 2021, which mandates the manufacturers to provide a durability period of at least 10 years on their products, while providing a choice to the consumer regarding repairing and servicing. So it ends up protecting the IP rights of the manufacturer without compromising quality standards, and allows the consumer to choose repairing and servicing from third party vendors as well, thereby striking a balance between right to repair and rights of manufacturers. Next, on page number 7, the Hindu carries an infographic that explains employment levels in the country. It is based on the employment data that has been brought out by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, and it shows a significant improvement in employment levels over the last few months. According to the data, 404 million people have been employed in the last 4 years, and it points to a broad based economic recovery that is underway following the economic disruption witnessed between 2019 and 2021. As per the charts, employment levels are almost back to pre pandemic levels, with massive job opportunities being created in the industry, especially in manufacturing, construction, real estate, and the metal industry. Employment levels had hit a record low in 2020 and 2021 as a result of the pandemic and the lockdowns. But now, with rising employment in the industry, the employment levels are coming back to pre pandemic levels. The data also shows a shift in pattern of employment from agriculture towards industry, because over the last 3 months, that is between March 2022 to May 2022, around 14.8 million jobs have been lost in agriculture, whereas 15.6 million jobs have been created in the industry. So this points towards a shift in the labor market from agriculture towards industry, with a nominal increase being noted even in the services sector. The highest increase in employment in the industry has been registered by the manufacturing sector, and a clear recovery is visible in real estate and construction, and as well as in the metal industry. This overall points to a broad based economic recovery and indicates a return to pre pandemic employment levels. Now let's look at this article from page number 12. The center has stated that it is going to boost the supply of fortified rice. In October 2021, the Government of India started an ambitious project to supply fortified rice, which is fortified with additional nutrients and vitamins. This was a pet project of Prime Minister Modi, under which fortified rice is being supplied to important nutrition and food security schemes such as ICDS, that is the Integrated Child Development Services, under which nutritional needs are taken care of for children and pregnant women. And it is also being supplied under PM Poshan scheme aimed at improving nutrition levels in the country. Under this scheme of distributing fortified rice, the government has already covered around 90 districts in the country and is looking to scale up the program to cover around 291 districts. For this purpose, the Food Corporation of India has already procured around 90 lakh tons of fortified rice, and the government is looking to further scale up this procurement and distribution. However, experts have warned that supplying fortified rice comes with side effects, because studies have shown that consumption of fortified rice, which has added synthetic vitamins, micronutrients, and iron, could lead to excessive accumulation of certain vitamins and micronutrients, and this could result in several abnormalities. It is said to cause side effects such as nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, sometimes even leading to severe toxicity that could even affect the functioning of the liver. But the government as of now has brushed aside these concerns, because according to the government, the side effects they far outweigh the benefits, because it helps in addressing nutritional deficiencies such as deficiencies of iron, calcium, and essential vitamins. According to the Secretary to the Union Ministry of Food and Public Distribution, widespread malnutrition in the country is already costing us 77,000 crore rupees in productivity as a result of untimely illness and death. So the government is looking to address these nutritional deficiencies to the supply and distribution of fortified rice, and the government has argued that the benefits they far outweigh the side effects, which justifies the need for the fortified rice program. Next, we have another important article on page number 12, according to which India is expanding its nuclear arsenal as per data brought out by SIPRI, or the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. SIPRI is a Sweden-based defense think tank that conducts research on nuclear arsenals of countries, along with maintaining data on the ongoing arms race in the world. According to its latest report, India has around 160 nuclear warheads in its arsenal, and it points to a slight expansion in India's nuclear arsenal. Previously, India was believed to possess around 150 nuclear warheads, and now the number has gone up to 160 as India attempts to catch up with Pakistan, which is already said to possess around 165 nuclear warheads. China, on the other hand, is way ahead with an estimated 350 nuclear warheads in its arsenal, while Russia and US continue to possess the most number of nuclear warheads in the world, that stands at a massive 5,977 and 5,428 nuclear warheads, respectively. Other nuclear powers, such as France and UK, are said to possess around 290 and 225 nuclear warheads, whereas Israel, which doesn't officially acknowledge its nuclear weapons program, is said to have developed around 90 warheads. North Korea, the nuclear rogue state, on the other hand, is said to have developed 20 warheads. And this data from SIPRI paints a picture about the nuclear arms race that is going on in the world. Then, coming to the last article for the day, let's look at this article from page number 14, according to which Russia has now emerged as the second biggest oil supplier to India. As per recent data, Iraq happens to be the largest oil supplier to India, which was usually followed by Saudi Arabia at the second position. But now, Russia has replaced Saudi Arabia as the second top oil supplier to India, as India has increased its purchase of Russian oil after Russia offered oil at a discounted price to countries like India, following the imposition of Western economic sanctions against Russia. So, with increasing Russian oil in the Indian energy basket, Saudi Arabia has been pushed to the third position, whereas Russia becomes the second largest oil supplier to India after Iraq. Now, let's take a look at a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: global food prices have been soaring over the last 2 years. Examine the factors responsible and the way to tackle the crisis. The second question: as US and China intensify their rivalry, other countries are faced with hard choices. Where does this leave India? Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link has been given in the description box below. And if you're finding the daily Hindu analysis to be beneficial, do let us know by liking the video, share the video with fellow aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.